as you'll find with most programming languages, whether it be HTML or CSS or JavaScript or PHP, many of these you probably never heard of, it's very traditional when learning them to do the first obligatory hello world example. And this means we're going to find a way to get the words hello world typically on the page, meaning within a web browser, we want to see hello world to show that we are up and running. And we can do that without using any tools other than maybe a simple editor. Even something like Notepad or TextEdit will work just fine. So if you are on Windows, open Notepad. I'm on a Mac, so I will search for TextEdit and open that up. Now, TextEdit is traditionally for writing Word documents, whether you're writing a story or a letter, but it can also be used for a variety of things, including creating HTML pages. So we will use this for the first example, and then I'm going to explain to you why you do not want to do this for your actual coding. But let's go ahead and get Hello World in a browser. So to start, we're not even going to use any kind of markup. We're going to type Hello World, and then I will go to File and save it, and we want to save it as an HTML page. So rather than using the default RTF or TXT extension, we need to specify that this page should be rendered as HTML. Next, I'm going to save it as index, and this is pretty traditional to specify the default page. So save that to the desktop, and now you can see that we have this new file. So if I would like to view this in the browser, I can either open a browser like Chrome, and I can go File, Open, choose that file, or in some OSs like Mac, I can take the file and drag it into the browser, and you'll see that it works like so. And it looks like I have Hello World I. So let's make our first edit. I will come back and change that from Hello World I to an exclamation point. I will save that by pressing Command S, or you can go to File, Save. And if we refresh, we've made our first edit. Now, notice we haven't added any true HTML here. We've just added some words, but nonetheless, it's still showing up in the browser. How is that? And that's because even though it's not HTML, the browser will make some assumptions. And when you have Hello World, it's smart enough to know that you simply want to display text on the page. That said, this is something you will never ever do in your projects. You want to use structured markup using HTML. So let's do it the right way. The very first step is we need to specify a doc type. Now, I don't want this to confuse you. I will go ahead and add it, doc type HTML. Now, what this does is it instructs the browser what version of the markup language is currently being used. Now, if this looks confusing to you, you'll be surprised that years ago it was a long string because we had very different versions, whether the strict version or a more flexible version. Now, I don't want you to worry about this too much. Just know it's a way to instruct the browser as to the version of the markup language you're using. Don't let that confuse you, though. Next, let's bring up the text just a bit, so I will bring that up to 18, like so. Next, we need to specify where our HTML is, and we can create HTML tags by doing it like so. Now, note that we have this opening bracket or less than sign, and then we have the name of the tag, and then we close it out. So if we just had it like this, we could add some text. But the problem is the browser will not know when you are finished with this particular tag. So it will assume for as long as the document is, this text will be within the HTML element or tag. You can use those interchangeably. So we should specify when we are finished with a tag. And we can do that by typing the same thing again, but the only difference being before the actual name, you do a /, and that way we designate that we are closing that tag off. So now I'm going to remove this because you don't traditionally put text within an HTML tag. The next step is we need to provide a couple details about the page itself. For example, let's open up Chrome again, and I want you to note if we go to a site like NetTuts, do you notice that the title right up here within the tab says Web Development Tutorials? How do you specify that? And that can be done within the head section of a page. So let's do that now. I'm going to create head, and now we are going to specify what the title of our page is. So I'm going to hit tab a couple times, and we use, as you might expect, a title element. And I will say my first website. Next, remember, if we simply hit enter and start typing again, the browser is going to assume that all of this is part of the title element, but it's not. So we need to make sure that we close this off so the browser understands that only this text should be part of the title. Next, we should specify the character type. And again, I don't want this to confuse you. So I will go ahead and add this in. And this is, again, another way to instruct the browser how to render specific characters because it will be different from country to country. Now, I want you to know this looks a little bit different. How come we have this / at the end? Well, let's dissect this. First, just like title, we have a meta element or tag. But next, we need to provide some attributes of the tag. And we can do that by doing the name of the attribute followed by an equal sign. Then within quotation marks, we paste in the value. So we could say name equals value. Attribute name, attribute value. Now, what's this / right here? Well, while we could do something like this, you'll find that when there's not any text meant to be placed in between a tag, it's very common to what we call self-close the tag, which means if there's never going to be anything here, we can simply copy this /, put it at the end, and then remove it, which saves us a little bit of space. And what you'll find is most developers prefer to add a space right after that last equal sign. However, do note that this is optional. Years ago, it was considered a best practice, always close your tags. But with HTML5, which you'll learn a little bit more in this course, it's actually just okay to do it like so. So whether or not you want to close it, many developers have gotten into the habit of it. They feel more comfortable doing so. That's fine. But if you'd like to leave it off, that's fine too. There's no right or wrong in this example. So now we have an element with an attribute name of charset or carset, and the value is UTF-8. And again, I don't want you to worry about this right now. It'll just make sure that your symbols are rendered correctly. So now we're done with the head section, but remember, we have to close that off. So I will do / head. Next, we want to display that hello world, but we don't do it like this. Instead, it's traditional that you wrap the text, the body of your page within an element called body. So I will type that now. And once again, I have to specify the end of the body of my page. So right at the bottom, I will close that out like so. So let's save that. I'm going to go to File, Save. And now let's reload the page. So this time, because the browser is open, I can take the file and simply drag it in like so. Now we'll see that strangely it seems that our tag names are being displayed on the page in the same way that Hello World was, but certainly with the page we don't want to see these tag names. And that's because within TextEdit it's still being treated as actual text, actual formatted text. So I will go to Format, Make Plain Text, and then I will go to File, Save a Version, and notice how it's defaulted to TXT. So let's come back and change that to HTML and try to view it in the browser, and now you can see that has changed. So yes, that is a little bit odd, and that's because TextEdit is making assumptions and assuming that you want formatted text when you really want simple HTML. So now you see only what was contained within the body element. If you'd like to get to the markup that we created, we can go to View, Developer, View Source. Now note, within each browser, this will be slightly different, but you should be able to find it if you hunt around the menu bar. And now if I load the source, you can see this is exactly what we typed. We specified the doc type, which tells the browser what version it is. We've specified where our HTML is. Next, we've specified the head section. Now I want you to note, if we come back, it says My First Website, and that's coming specifically from the title element. Next, we specify the meta charset. Don't worry about that too much right now. And then we add our first Hello World, which is displayed on the page. And this is good formatting. This is the formatting that a pro would use. It's nice, clean. We're following best practices. So good job. Pat yourself on the back. You've just built your first web page. Doesn't do much just yet, but you'll get there. So in the next lesson, I'm going to start showing you how to format this text. Before we continue on with formatting our text, I don't want you to be using Notepad or TextEdit. That's a really bad practice these days. Instead, we should use a code editor that was specifically made for writing code. So I'm going to open up my browser, and the one we'll be using in our lessons is going to be called Sublime Text 2. And I'm choosing this one because there are versions available for Windows, Mac, and Linux. So more or less whatever browser you're using, you should have an option available. Also, it's a fantastic editor. So go to sublimetext.com, and if we scroll down, you'll see that there is a download link. Click that, and that will download it to your desktop. Once you've done so, simply open up the file you downloaded, and here we are. Now yours, depending on your OS, might look slightly different from mine, but it's all the same underneath the hood. So I will take our file and drag it in like so. Now you can see, in addition to offering quite a bit of flexibility, there is syntax highlighting so we can more easily associate where our values are, where our element names, etc., etc. If you would like to adjust some of the settings, you can always go to the app name, preferences, color scheme, and you can play around with some of the options that are available, whether you would prefer maybe a dark color or a light. We're going to stick with light for this tutorial, so I will switch that back, like so. Now, we're going to move ahead and learn how to format our text. So notice here I have hello world, but what if I want that really bold? We want to shoot it out to the user. Well, we can use a heading element to do that. So I will type H1, and this says the text here should be a heading level 1 element. That's the topmost heading, and generally that means it's going to be the largest, it's going to receive the most weight when the browser looks at it. But once again, if we wanted to type, here's my text, let's save that. I will go to File, Save, or from now on I will type Command S to do so. And now I want to go back and view this in the browser. Now notice it says hello world, and then it says here's my text. So it is receiving this heavier weight, the text is bold, but this should not be bold as well. That's not right. Well, let's go back. And the problem is, as we learned in the very first introductory lesson, we did not close the H1, so the browser just assumed everything that followed it should be the heading level 1. So always remember to close this out. And we use the / to do it. Now if I save it, and if I come back to Chrome, reload the page, now only this has received hello world. And then we have our text. Let's view the source, and this time I'm going to use the keyboard shortcut. Rather than view source on my Mac, it will be Option Command U. So I will do that now. Now notice everything's looking good. It looks identical to what we've typed in. But here is my text. What is that? Well, that would be maybe a paragraph. It's a paragraph of text. However, it's always a best practice when you're creating HTML pages to explicitly specify what your content is. So here, it's wrapped within the body. You can get away with this, but why don't we specify this is a paragraph of text? So we do that by using the P element or tag. I'll wrap that within P. And now we're saying from the point of the browser, it goes through here and it says, okay, we have a heading 1, hello world, and then we have a paragraph of text that says, here is my text. Command S to save that, come back and refresh, and it's going to look the same to you, but it's still following best practices, and that's what I want you to do in this course. Now, we're not going to cover too much of this until you've gotten a little bit further, but I want you to keep something in the back of your mind. How does the browser know that a H1 element should be this size, this font, and this font weight, or meaning bold? How does it know that? And that's because browsers have some default styling in place. So unless you override it, when a browser comes across this, it's going to say, okay, well, I will generally make this bold, I will make the font size much larger, I will use this font. Now, most of the time you may find that you don't want this, but I want you to always keep this in the back of your mind. The fact that this paragraph of text right here has a little bit of spacing above, and the fact that the heading has a little spacing below, that is all coded. It's not done for you. In this case, the browser provides a default, what we call a style sheet or CSS file that specifies that there should be what we call margins below. So we'll get to that in a future lesson, but for now, just think about it. Next, I want to add some emphasis to my. So how can we emphasize a particular word? We can do that by using the EM element. And EM stands for emphasis. So now we're telling the browser, here's my text, it's a paragraph, but this specific word needs to receive emphasis. Now, what form that takes? I don't know. Let's save it and view it in the browser, refresh, and now I want you to note that if I zoom in, my is now italic. Again, this is the default. It's quite common. Most people keep it, but the browser has set that by default. Any element that is emphasized should have italic text. Now, what's the opposite of this? Well, that would be strong, meaning we are going to make this particular string or this particular word strong. So here I will wrap here within a strong element. And traditionally, this is used to make text bold, but it does not have to. It can do anything you want. While it's common to make an M element italic, it can be anything you want at all. There is no right or wrong, just defaults. Refresh, and now can you see here is bold because we used a strong element. My is italic because we used an M element. Notice this is what creating HTML is. It's describing your content. In Microsoft Word, you can simply choose a font size, a font color, and then you begin typing. When you press enter, it will automatically add some spacing. But within HTML, we need to explicitly state that we're having a paragraph. We have a heading here. And what you'll find is, while it might seem like more work at first, I prefer it. If I were writing a book, I would honestly prefer to do it in HTML rather than a program like Microsoft Word. And you might feel the same after a few months. In the next lesson, I'm going to teach you how to create a list of items. Welcome to day 3. So I noted in the last lesson that today we would cover how to create a list of items. If you've used a normal text editor, you might do this. This is my list. Here is another item. This is fairly common, right? Well, within HTML, what would happen if we just saved this and came back and viewed it? We would get it all on one line because remember, HTML, it's not going to honor this white space unless you tell it to. Instead, it's just going to read this all as one long string, as you can see like so. So there's a couple ways around this. One is to use what we call a break element, and that means create a line break here. Let's do that now. I can do BR and self-close it as we did up here, or it's equally okay for you to do it like so. So let's keep it like this way for now. As a rule of thumb though, try to be consistent. So if you leave it off, try to leave it off in all places of your document. It'll make it a little cleaner. So in this case, I will go ahead and remove that like so. And now if I come back and reload the page, can you see that now each one of these is on our own line? But again, as soon as we add another item, I'll save that and come back, it's all going to be on that own line. So you need to specify each place where there's a line break. So what if you wanted more than one line break? You could add another one. So now I'm going to say have 2 line breaks, like so. So as you can imagine though, this is the way it was done in the old days, and this can really quickly create very, very sloppy code. So it is okay to use a break element when that is really what you need. You need a line break. However, most of the time you'll find there is a better tool for the job. In this case, we're trying to create a list, but we're not using actual HTML markup to create a list. Let's do that now. We specify a list by doing UL. Now, there are a couple types of lists, and we'll go over each one today. This one is called an unordered list, which means we're not doing this in numbers, meaning number 1, number 2. There is no order, so we use unordered list. Again, I close it out because I have to specify when this list completes, and that's the only way I can do it. Let's add a list item. So I don't simply add my items here. I have to use another tag, and this is called a child tag, list item. And now I will say, go to the mall. Maybe we have our tasks. Again, I have to close out my list item, so let's save that and see what we get. Now again, note that by default, it doesn't have to be this way, but by default, we have a bullet and it's indented a little bit. Now this is important for me to drill into your head. A list does not have to be formatted like you would normally see, whether it's tasks or anything of that nature. A list simply refers to the most basic level, a list of items. That's it. As long as what you are adding within your list conforms to that, then it's fine. There is an element called definition list that we'll look at shortly that is the same way. A definition list has a definition followed by the term followed by the actual definition or the details. And you can have a list of these. So as long as it conforms to the word list, you can use it and you don't need to worry about how it looks on the page by default at all, because that is all overridable. Let's add a couple more. So I can do this manually, or it's common to select the entire bit of code. And here on the Mac, I'm doing Shift Command Right. On the PC, it'll probably be Control Shift Right. Then I will hit Command C or Control C and Command V or Control V. And I will assume that you have a basic understanding of how to do those types of tasks. So now we will say shop, and we'll do one more, get gas, and drive home, like so. Let's save that. And note that we have a bit of spacing here. Always try to be consistent. So if we don't have any spacing up here, we probably shouldn't have any here. Now, this all comes down to personal preference. So the key is be consistent. If you like a spacing, like I do this sometimes to give some breathing room, then always try to do that here. Otherwise, it can get a little messy when your markup is inconsistent. I'm going to save that, come back, refresh the page, and now, as we would hope, we have a nice list of items. So if we were to come back, and let's say we want to remove this and we want to provide a heading, things I need to do today. Well, on this page, the most important heading is things I need to do today. So I will do H1, things I must do today. And I'm going to close that off. Save it, and now we have a nice task list. And this is something you could do on your own. If you need to keep a list of things you need to do that day, you can code it in HTML, and you don't have to worry about using a program like Word to format it, because this will work perfectly. Next, let's take a look at an ordered list. And the only difference is, rather than using UL, we use OL. Now, Sublime Text has a nice feature where if you select a bit of text, and on the Mac it's Control-Command-G, you can see that it will select every occurrence of that sequence. So what's nice about this is it will create multiple cursors. If I wanted to change this to an ordered list, after pressing Control-Command-G, I can now type OL and notice that it updates in each section. On the PC, on the other hand, you will press Alt F3. So for example, if I said hello, and down here hello, and then maybe up here hello as well, I'm going to select this word, press Control-Command-G on the Mac or Alt F3, and it's going to select every occurrence of this. But it's not just a find and replace. It creates cursors. If I zoom in, notice that there's a cursor here, here, and here. And now I can delete that and write goodbye. Believe it or not, this is a very new addition to code editors, and it's vital that you use it. We joke these days that I couldn't imagine not having this option available. And I also want you to note, it's only available to my understanding in Sublime Text, but it'll surely become available in other editors in the future. But it's a very good technique to have, especially in situations like this, where we only need to change one or two letters, rather than doing it manually like this, which takes time, and it's still okay if you do that. I would prefer to select it and update both at once. So now we've switched to an ordered list. Let's see what the difference is. Now, this is more appropriate when you need to number things. Number 1, number 2, as you can see right here. So whether you use an unordered list or an ordered list really comes down to how you intend to use it. In this case of tasks, I think it makes more sense to use an unordered list because there is no order of events. So I will switch that back. However, if I did something like the 5 best ways to code, then I would use an ordered list for number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4, and number 5. So now that we've covered unordered lists and ordered lists, let's take a look at the last and least common, which is the definition list. So we will place this at the top, and we do a definition list by doing DL. Notice how often the element names correspond to the actual name. DL for definition list. Now this is slightly more complex, but you can understand it. A definition list requires for each item the term as well as the details. So it's common to use it for definitions, but it doesn't have to as long as you can make it fit into that concept. Let's stick with the definition idea. And let's say we want the definition term, and we'll say Sublime, and I'm going to close it out. And now we need to provide the definition for this or the details for that. It doesn't have to be a definition. It's just simply a way to connect this to this value. And I will say a code editor. Let's view that in the browser. Refresh. And now notice that the default formatting is to have the term here, then the details or the definition is on its own line and indented. So if we wanted to have a handful of these, I could copy this and paste them in like so. And I'll do a couple more. I refresh. Now you can see all of them take that syntax and styling. But again, it does not have to. If you would like the details to be on the same line as the term, you can do that as well. And we'll learn how to do that when we dig into our CSS. For now, we need to learn the basics and the structure of our page before we can style our page. Now, before we finish up for the day, I want you to take note of a couple things. Remember how within our paragraph, we could say hi, and then we could make there bold, like so. This is perfectly fine and clean markup. Now, this is not necessarily always going to be true. For example, there are elements that will only accept certain other elements as children. Now, I want you to remember when I say children and parent, you can use the indentation as triggers in your mind. The definition list has children, and those children are the DT element and the DD, and we indent them to specify that they are children, but you don't have to. Notice if I did this like so, and I viewed it in the browser, nothing would change. It's all the same. But we indent for ourselves and because it creates cleaner code. Also, it's a nicer way to know these are children of this element. So for example, the DT is a child of the definition list. This paragraph element is a child, not of the H1, but a child of the body element. And we're going to take a look at that in day 4 much more specifically. But for now, it's important for you to know that you cannot simply take this paragraph of text right here and put it within a definition list. Let's see what would happen if we did though. Save it, and if I refresh the page, you will see that it seemingly works. Let's try removing it, and we'll place it down here as well. Refresh, and seemingly it does work. And this is an important distinction to make, is that the browser will make up for your bad coding. Always remember that. The browser will make assumptions about what you meant here. So even though this is a bad practice, the browser will say, okay, well, he meant well. Let's just go ahead and display this on the page. But a definition list only wants definition terms and details. And if you don't follow this, in some browsers, there may be errors, because while Chrome may be smart enough to make up for your bad coding, maybe an old version of Internet Explorer will not. So always follow best practices. And this is going to be true for an unordered list as well. We cannot simply add a heading tag. We cannot simply add a heading tag like so. If I view it in the browser, it'll display fine, but it's not following good practices. An unordered list wants list items as children. It didn't ask for a heading or anything that is not a list item. In this case, if we wanted to add a heading within a list, you can do that, but make sure you place it within a list item like so. Now if I come back, it's going to look the same, but it's following the best practices. Now here's one other quick note, is what if you have a heading and then you want a paragraph? If I save that, reload, that looks fine, but notice how quickly this is getting messy. So if you have just a bit of text or code, you can place it on one line like so. But if you have a lot, it's a best practice to separate the list item into one or more lines, and then you can take everything within it and indent, like so. So now we have a list item, and within it, here are the children, and it's going to display the same, but it looks much cleaner. So always follow good indentation practices. In the next lesson, we're going to focus on parent-child relationships and what that means. While we touched on parent-child relationships in the previous episode, we need to focus a little more specifically on it today. So, the Most adult, or the oldest, or the ancestor of our page would be the HTML element. And an easy way we can tell that is because it is not indented at all. So everything else is a child of the HTML element. Let's view it in terms of the body element of our page. Notice here how the H1 is not indented, but it probably should be. Now what you'll find is it's not required, and a lot of coders prefer not to do it because there's only so much screen real estate available. So while you should do this, if you have a lot on your page, some coders will not do it because it's implied that the body is the parent. So note that everything I'm covering today is not required, they're best practices. The H1 element is a child of the body element. But what if within the H1 element, I'm going to add a little bit more, so I will separate it on its own line, and then I will say within a new tag, and I'm going to say span. This is a simple wrapper, and it doesn't have any specific formatting, but it allows you to target a specific amount of text. So we will take today and wrap it within here like so. When would you ever do this? If there is no formatting to span, why would you do it? And let's say you wanted to write things I must do today, but you wanted the word today to be blue and everything else to be black. Well, you need a way then to target just the word today and nothing else. So we can do that by using a number of elements, but it's common to use a span. And that way we can say, eventually when you start learning about styling, you can say, look for the heading 1 element, and then try to see if there's a span element. And if there is within it, make that value alone, meaning this word, blue. Back to our parent-child relationships. The span element is now a child of the H1 element. And I'm going to zoom in just a touch. However, the H1 is a child of the body element. So think of it as a family tree. So this is the oldest, and then this person is the HTML's child, and then the H1 is the child of the body. The span is a grandchild of the HTML, or we don't use grandparent and grandchild, we use ancestor and descendant. So span is a descendant of the body element. H1 is not a descendant of the body. Technically it is, but more appropriately we would say a child. It is a direct child of the body, because this does not have any parent that is not the body. So it's the child of the body. This is the descendant of the HTML element. The span is a descendant of the HTML. The span is a child of the H1. This strong tag right here, if it's easier, we'll put it on its own line. This strong is a child of the paragraph element. But is the strong a child of the H1 element? No, because note, this paragraph is not nested within the H1 tag. So the strong is a child of the paragraph tag. It is a descendant of the body tag, but it has zero relation to the H1 element. So that begs the question now, what is the relation between the paragraph element to the heading 1 element? Like brother and sister, they are siblings. This H1 has a sibling of the P tag. It's also a sibling of the definition list. Now this might be confusing to you, or you might be thinking, what does this really serve me? And right now at this point, it's more important for you to understand that this is a child of this. But in the future, you will learn that it is vital, specifically when you are, for example, using something like JavaScript to search through your documents. It's important to understand relationships. So I want you to create just a bit of code, anything you want, and try to correctly answer the relationship between each one. We'll do this last one together before we end for the day. The definition term is a child of the definition list. The definition details are a child of the definition list as well. These two are siblings. And how do we know for sure? They are siblings because this definition details is not nested within the term. If it was like that, then this in fact would be a child, but that would be bad markup. So these are siblings to one another. The definition list is a sibling to this unordered list. This H1 is a descendant of the UL, and alternatively, the UL is an ancestor of the H1 element. So that's a lot of relationships. Hopefully that's stuck. If not, go back and watch it and then try to figure out these on your own today. Up until now, we've only briefly touched on the idea of headings. So let's dig a bit deeper and learn all of the various headings that are available to us. I will return to Sublime and we have a fresh HTML page. So right now you know about heading 1 tags. When it comes to headings, we have 6 what we call levels. So we have an H1, H2, H3, H4, H5, and H6. So the biggest thing that you need to understand is when to use each of these. And the best way I can explain it is by thinking of importance. So if we think only in terms of SEO, search engine optimization, if you could only tell Google one thing, you would probably want to put it within an H1 tag. So this could be the title of a blog posting because that's the most important thing. So I will rename this my awesome blog posting. And then here, of course, we would have the body of our posting. But surely you'll want to have some subheadings as well, but those won't be quite as important as the title, of course. So you might have an H2 or even an H3 for subheadings. And then you could have maybe some additional information, and this is a nice way to separate a blog posting so that you don't just have 30 paragraphs, you can divide it so people can easily scan. It's even possible within your subheading, you have a specific point you want to make that's related to this topic, but it's not a new topic on its own, so that's when you can use H3s and H4s, and this is how it works. It comes in order of importance. So now let's think of it from the point of an actual website. Let's go visit NetTuts. Notice here we have headings. So we have the title, which is NetTuts, but then you have each individual blog posting. So let's see how we can figure out what that is. In Chrome, I can right-click and choose Inspect Element, and this allows me to view the HTML. Notice this little magnifying glass right here. I'm going to click that and now hover over whatever it is that I wish to review. In this case, it's the title. So what we can see here is it's an heading level 1 tag. And you can see he's doing that for each one. So if we want to go down and look at the next one, you can see that the same is being done here, a heading level 1 tag. Okay, well let's open up this blog posting now and see how this one is. Once again, we have a heading 1 because that's the most important part of the page. And let's come down. Here we have a subheading, so let's see what that is. We have a heading 2 because it's still quite important, but it's not the most important thing on the page. Let's scroll down a little more. And it looks like there are no heading 3 tags, but we can add one just as easily. So why don't we go to the conclusion, and this time I will edit the paragraph tag. Just after it, I will add a heading 3, hit enter, and we are finished with that, so I will escape out. And now you can see that it's going to automatically receive any formatting that NetTuts has set up for heading 3 tags. So we have a heading 2 and then a nested heading 3 because this isn't quite as important. We need to specify this whole chunk is our conclusion, but then we have a little bit of extra notes. So you have heading 1, 2, 3, and 4. Those are predominantly what you'll use the most. H1, H2, H3, and H4. But if you can, try to use H5 and H6 as well because these are very helpful for Google's bots so they can figure out exactly what your postings, what your website is all about.